You don't cry because you're weak. You cry because something inside of you is finally breaking free. It starts quietly. You're brushing your teeth, driving home, folding laundry, and then, for no reason you can name, you feel it. That knot in your throat, that pressure in your chest, the sudden urge to disappear, to scream, to collapse. You're not hurt. Nothing happened, but everything feels wrong. You can't explain it. That's not anxiety. That's not just sadness. That's your soul screaming under the weight of everything it's been forced to carry. Masks, lies, old roles, outdated versions of you that you've kept alive just to survive. But now the survival mode is cracking, and it hurts. But that pain is sacred. We were never taught that healing feels like falling apart. We were told to stay strong, stay productive, keep smiling. But no one told you that sometimes strength is saying, I can't keep pretending anymore. No one told you that the breakdown might be the only way your soul can get your attention. And so, here you are, standing in the middle of your life like a stranger to your own reflection, wondering if you've lost your mind, when in truth, you've finally stopped losing your soul. People think awakening feels like light. But what if it feels like emptiness at first? What if the feeling of being lost is actually the first sign that you're leaving the prison of who you thought you had to be? You weren't created to play small. You weren't meant to live disconnected from your truth, and your body knows it. That heaviness you feel, that fatigue you can't explain, that ache that lives in your chest, those are symptoms of the soul detoxing. You are not broken. You are being rebuilt. Most of the emotional pain we experience doesn't come from being wrong. It comes from being false. We said yes when we meant no. We stayed when we should have left. We smiled when our insides were screaming. We became experts at performing okayness. And now the mask is slipping. That's why it feels like grief, because something is dying. And that something is the illusion that you ever had to be anything but your truth. Let me tell you something you may not want to hear. The collapse you feel is not a failure. It's a release. Your soul is done negotiating. It no longer wants to fit in. It wants to break out. And that's why your system is short-circuiting. That's why your thoughts are spiraling. That's why your sleep is disrupted. Your appetite is off. Your mood feels like a roller coaster. Because everything that's not aligned with who you really are is being purged. And you don't have to understand it all right now. You don't have to fix it, label it, or solve it. You only have to feel it. That's the part we were never taught. How to actually sit with our pain long enough to let it speak, to let it tell us what it came to burn away. Not every fire comes to destroy. Some come to cleanse. Some come to unchain you. There's a reason people hit rock bottom before they rise. Not because they're weak, but because it takes everything falling apart to finally see what was never real to begin with. The fake relationships, the self-betrayal, the beliefs that were never yours, the dreams that weren't even yours to begin with, just borrowed from family, religion, culture, survival. And then, one day, your body says, enough. It whispers through insomnia, screams through anxiety, weeps through exhaustion. It does everything it can to make you stop long enough to ask, what if this pain is not a problem? What if it's a signal? A signal that the version of you that could survive in a loveless world is no longer needed. A signal that your soul doesn't want to be managed. It wants to be free. You can't bypass this stage. You can't meditate your way out of it or journal it into neat little boxes, because the real work is raw. It's inconvenient. It will disrupt your life. It will make you cancel plans, leave jobs, end relationships, question everything. And that's how it's supposed to be. Awakening is not aesthetic. It's messy. It's chaotic. It's tears in the parking lot and silence at family dinners and a deep, aching loneliness that comes not from being alone, but from finally refusing to betray yourself just to belong. And here's the part no one talks about. This pain, it's intelligent. It knows what it's doing. It is guiding you back to your center, stripping you of every false layer until what remains is pure, honest, whole, you. But to get there, something has to die. And it feels like you, but it's not. It's the you that learned to hide, to shrink, to tolerate what hurt, to pretend to be okay. That version is burning away. and it's okay to grieve it. You lived a long time in that skin. You did what you had to do. But now, the season is shifting. The collapse is calling, and it's not a punishment. It's a beginning. You may think you're falling apart, but your soul knows better. It's not destruction. It's detox. When your body trembles without warning, when you wake up with tears on your face, when the thought of small talk makes you want to run, you are not becoming weaker. You're becoming real. You're shedding. And that's why it feels unbearable. Because what's leaving you isn't just a bad habit or a thought pattern. It's identity. It's who you had to become to survive a world that never saw you. And the process of losing that version hurts like hell. Not because it was true, but because it was familiar. We hold on to our chains when they've been with us long enough to feel like home. But the soul doesn't want familiar. It wants freedom. And so it begins the holy, brutal work of detoxing every part of you that isn't rooted in your essence. Have you ever noticed how grief doesn't always come from death? Sometimes it comes from realizing the person you've been wasn't you. It comes in waves. The memories of when you smiled and felt empty, the echoes of conversations where you agreed just to avoid the silence, the moments you called love what was actually fear. That's spiritual grief, and it's the first sign that the soul is waking up. Pain is the language of rebirth. It's not the enemy, it's the midwife. The ego tells you, you're breaking down. The soul whispers, you're breaking open. And the moment you start to feel everything, the ache, the anger, the unbearable stillness, that's the moment you know something deeper is rising. You are being emptied. Not because there is something wrong with you, but because there's something false in you that can no longer stay. The old energy is heavy. It keeps you tied to stories that you've outgrown, but didn't know how to leave. It says, don't question, don't feel, just keep going. But now your soul is saying the opposite. It's asking you to stop, to feel, to sit in the rawness without a plan, without performance, because it's only in that stillness that the real healing begins. We've been programmed to fear discomfort, to fix it, numb it, outrun it. But pain that is not listened to becomes suffering. Pain that is listened to becomes clarity. And what is clarity, really? It's when the soul rises above the noise of conditioning and says, This isn't love, this isn't peace, this isn't who I came here to be. It's that piercing moment when you can't unsee what you've seen. You can't unknow what you now know. And that knowing breaks things. It breaks routine. It breaks relationship. It breaks your ability to settle. And while that's terrifying, it's also sacred, because the collapse of the false is the beginning of the true. Have you ever wondered why the people who've suffered the most often carry the deepest wisdom? It's not a coincidence. Pain forces presence. It pulls you out of the scripted life and into the raw, unscripted now. It strips away the distractions and demands your attention, not just to what's happening, but to who it's happening to. It makes you ask questions you were too afraid to ask before. Who am I? What do I believe? Why am I here? Why does it all hurt so much? And if you stay in that space long enough, the answers begin to come, slowly, quietly, not from books, not from gurus, but from inside you. The place that's always known, the place that's been waiting patiently for you to be still long enough to listen. You see, the detox doesn't just clear pain. It clears noise, all the expectations, all the voices that were never yours. It unhooks you from the systems that taught you to abandon yourself in order to belong. And when the noise dies down, you meet someone you haven't met in a long time. Yourself, not the self that gets applauded. The self that sits alone and feels everything and still chooses to stay. And here's the truth no one tells you. The healing journey will not always make you look better. Sometimes it will make you unrecognizable to the people who loved your performance. Sometimes it will make you lose things you thought you needed. Jobs, friendships, even dreams. But what you lose in illusion, you gain in truth. And what you gain in truth, nothing can take from you. There's a sacredness to the moments when you're curled up on the floor, weeping, shaking, unable to form words. That is not failure. That is rebirth. That is the body remembering that it's not just flesh. It's a vessel for something eternal. That is the soul saying, We're not doing this anymore. We're not pretending. We're not settling. We're not staying in places where we shrink just to be accepted. That's why it hurts, because you're expanding. And expansion is a tearing, a stretching, a death. And like all deaths, it demands grief. But also like all deaths, it makes space for resurrection. There's a moment in every spiritual awakening when you realize you're not becoming someone new. You're returning to someone ancient, someone buried, someone who was never allowed to fully arrive. And the pain you feel now isn't punishment, it's excavation. You are not lost. You are being uncovered. When you feel like you're unraveling, like every part of you is being stripped away, like the ground is falling from beneath your feet, that's the moment the soul is closest. Because the soul doesn't speak in comfort, it speaks in clarity. And clarity can burn. It scorches everything that was built on fear, and it lights a fire under every part of your life that was running on autopilot. You might be feeling like you're dying. In a way, you are, but not in the way fear imagines. It's not your life that's ending. It's your illusions. The illusion that you had to be perfect to be loved. The illusion that keeping the peace is worth your silence. The illusion that your worth is measured in your productivity. That illusion is dying, and its death is sacred. Do you know what happens when an animal sheds its skin? It becomes vulnerable, soft, raw, and in that vulnerability, it grows. That's what's happening to you. You are shedding layers that were never meant to stay. Layers that were formed in trauma, in conditioning, in survival. And now, you're being invited to stop surviving and start living. But living in truth isn't easy. It costs you everything that's not aligned. It costs you fake smiles, shallow relationship, scripted role. It costs you the ability to tolerate environments where your soul goes silent. And at first, that feels like loss. But it's not loss. It's realignment. The soul doesn't subtract without replacing. When it removes, it creates space. And that space, that silence, that stillness you're afraid of, that's where the true self returns. You may have been taught that your feelings were too much, that your dreams were unrealistic, that your hunger for depth was dramatic. But what if I told you that wasn't dysfunction? It was discernment. What if your soul wasn't broken, just bored of pretending? The systems we grow up in don't reward depth. They reward performance, smiling when you're sad, producing when you're tired, belonging at any cost. And we learn to shapeshift, to become who we think they need us to be, until one day we break. We break because the soul was never meant to be small. It was never meant to be quiet, polite, palatable. It was meant to roar. And that roar, the one that's rising now, is why everything hurts. You see, the soul doesn't evolve by adding more. It evolves by remembering. Remembering what it knew before it learned to hide. Remembering the child who danced without shame. The teen who questioned everything. The part of you that said no before you were taught it was rude. That's not regression. That's reclamation. You're not fragile. You're fierce. But your fierceness has been trapped beneath layers of pretending. And now, the pain is cracking those layers open. The tears, they're not weakness. They're water for the seeds of your truth. Have you ever sat in silence and heard your own heartbeat and realized you've been running from yourself? That you've filled your days with noise to avoid the voice inside? That voice is calling now, and pain is how it gets your attention. It's not screaming to destroy you. It's begging you to come home. The great mystics knew this. Rumi once wrote, "The wound is the place where the light enters you." That's not poetry. That's medicine. Your wound is not a mistake. It's an entry point, a sacred invitation to go deeper than you've ever gone. And the deeper you go, the more false identities fall away. The more clarity rises. The more peace becomes your default, not your reward. But here's the twist. No one prepares you for. The more you remember who you are, the more uncomfortable you become in the places you used to tolerate. Not because you're better, but because you're truer. You can't unsee what you've seen. You can't unfeel what your soul has felt. And that dissonance between who you were and who you are becoming, that's where the fire lit. And that fire is holy. It will burn bridges that led to nowhere. It will burn masks you wore to stay safe. It will burn patterns you called love, but were really self-abandonment. And what's left in the ashes is you, the real you, the untamed, unapologetic, soul-led version of you that was always waiting beneath the noise. Some people won't understand this journey. They'll say you've changed, that you're too intense, that you've become distant. But what they're really seeing is that you've stopped performing. And when you stop performing, people who loved the show won't know how to respond. Let them go. Bless them. They were part of the story, but they're not part of the awakening. And the awakening isn't a moment. It's a movement, a continuous unfolding, a spiral of remembering, releasing, reclaiming. And right now, you are in the center of that spiral. That's why it feels like chaos. That's why you feel like you're both dying and being born, because you are. There's a strange moment that comes after the fire. When the pain has peaked, the illusions have cracked, and everything you once called you starts to dissolve. It's not peace, not yet. It's emptiness, and that emptiness can feel terrifying, like standing in a house after a storm, where all the walls are gone, and there's nothing left to hide behind. This is where many people try to go back to the familiar, back to the roles that used to fit, back to the comfort of a smaller self, because the silence is too loud, the clarity too sharp. But going back would mean abandoning the soul again, and your soul didn't bring you this far to turn around. This is the space between death and rebirth, between who you were and who you are becoming, the sacred liminal. It's the desert Moses walked, the cave Muhammad entered, the wilderness Jesus faced. Every spiritual transformation walks through this space, because before the soul ascends, it strips. And in that stripping, it teaches you something terrifyingly beautiful. You are not your name, not your job, not your identity, not even your beliefs. You are awareness. And awareness doesn't cling. It witnesses. It allows. This space is where most people think they're failing. They say, "I don't know who I am anymore," as if that's a sign of collapse. But in truth, it's a sign of evolution. When the caterpillar enters the cocoon, it dissolves into mush. It doesn't grow wings on its old body. It becomes unrecognizable. That phase is necessary. The breaking down isn't the end, it's the design. In modern life, we rarely allow for this phase. Everything tells you to be decisive, productive, sure of yourself. We glorify confidence, certainty, clarity, but the soul doesn't move in straight line. It spirals, it deepens, it wanders, and in the wandering, it reclaims pieces of you that were buried under the pressure to have it all figured out. You are in sacred territory now, a space where nothing is fixed and everything is possible. But it feels like you're floating, like the ground is gone, like no one understands. That's because most people have never been here. They're still running on pattern, still wearing masks, still busy. And busy is the perfect way to avoid transformation. Because when you stop, really stop, that's when the soul speaks. And what it says is not always easy to hear. It says, you've been living a life that wasn't yours. It says, you've been performing love instead of receiving it. It says, you've been shrinking to fit into spaces that were never made for someone like you. And as those truths echo inside you, you begin to realize that the pain you've been carrying wasn't random. It was a compass, a divine signal that something wasn't aligned, that your life was loud but not true. And now, stripped of all the noise, you're finally in a position to listen. But what do you listen for? The answer isn't outside. It's not in another book, another teacher, another ritual. It's in the pulse behind your ribs, the ache in your gut, the whisper in the stillness that says, this is not the end, it's the clearing. In ancient initiation rites, there was always a stage of isolation, the symbolic death. The initiate was removed from their tribe, from their identity, from their known world, not as punishment, but as preparation, because what was about to be born in them couldn't survive in the old environment. It had to be protected, nurtured in silence, until it was strong enough to emerge. That's what your soul is doing. It's initiating you. You are not broken. You are not late. You are not behind. You are becoming. But becoming isn't comfortable. It's not graceful. It's not linear. It's violent in its honesty, gentle in its timing, brutal in its clarity. It asks everything of you especially the parts you still try to protect. And the longer you hold on to what no longer fits, the louder the pain becomes. Because pain is not cruelty. Pain is precision. It cuts only what cannot come with you. So when you feel the ache in your chest, the hollowness in your bones, the tears that come for no reason, don't run, don't numb, don't distract. Sit, breathe, listen. Because in that discomfort, something ancient is stirring, something primal, something pure. It's the part of you that never gave up, never compromised, never forgot. And that part is rising now, not with force, not with anger, but with truth. And truth doesn't scream. It hums. It settles. It rearranges your inner landscape so gently that you don't even notice, until one day you wake up and realize you're no longer afraid. Not because life got easier, but because you got real. And realness is the end of fear. It's also the beginning of power. The kind of power that doesn't dominate, but radiates. The kind that doesn't need to prove anything, because it's rooted in essence. You don't need to shout your worth anymore. You don't need to chase love that costs you your peace. You don't need to stay in spaces where your presence feels like a burden, because now you remember. You remember that being misunderstood isn't a problem. It's a sign you've stopped conforming. You remember that solitude isn't punishment. It's how the soul breathes. You remember that letting go isn't weakness. It's sacred rebellion. And in remembering, you return to yourself, to your voice, to the silent fire that's been waiting beneath the ashes. There comes a moment in your healing where you stop asking, "When will this end?" And instead you whisper, "Thank you." Not because the pain was pleasant, not because the path was smooth, but because something inside you has changed so completely you no longer need to be saved. You've become your own sanctuary. This is the point where most people finally understand why it had to hurt, why the silence was so loud, why the relationships had to fall apart, why the betrayal happened. It wasn't punishment, it was preparation. And the version of you that's emerging from the fire isn't weak, isn't lost, isn't broken. It's forged. You can't fake this kind of wholeness. It doesn't come from pretending. It doesn't come from endless affirmations or superficial self-love mantras. It comes from meeting yourself in the cave, sitting with your own shadow, holding your own grief like a child and saying, "I'm not leaving you again." And as you begin to move through the world differently, something strange happens. People notice. They can't always explain it, but they feel it. That you're not chasing, that you're not performing, that your peace is no longer negotiable. And this energy, this quiet sovereignty, it either draws people closer or pushes them away. That's how you know it's real. Because your healing will offend those who benefited from your wounding. Your wholeness will disturb the systems that profited from your confusion. Your authenticity will be too much for those who only loved your mask, but you won't shrink anymore. You've lived through too much to keep hiding. You've walked through too many internal wars to keep apologizing for your presence. You've buried too many pieces of yourself to let anyone else decide who you get to be now. And so, you begin to speak differently. Not louder, but clearer. You say no with your chest. You walk away without guilt. You stop explaining your soul to people who never cared to understand it. You stop waiting for closure from those who were never honest to begin with. And in doing so, you create space. Space for breath, for art, for joy, for silence that feels like home instead of punishment. This is the reward of the pain you thought would destroy you. Freedom. Not the kind of freedom that comes from running. The kind that comes from returning to the body, to the breath, to the soul that kept showing up, even when you abandoned it, to the child inside you who kept dreaming, even when the world tried to convince you it was naive. You start to notice small things, the way your shoulders rest differently when you're not pretending, the way your laugh comes out unfiltered, raw, real, the way you wake up without the same ache in your chest, not because life is perfect now, but because you're not betraying yourself to fit into it. And in this sacred integration, something ancient clicks into place. Your power doesn't come from what you achieve. It comes from what you allow yourself to be. Your worth isn't measured by your productivity. It's in your presence. Your peace isn't proof that everything is okay. It's the result of no longer needing it to be. You become the eye of the storm, calm, aware, untouchable. And when others look at you and say, "You've changed," you smile because you have. But what they don't understand is, you didn't become someone new. You became who you were before the world told you to be someone else. This is what liberation feels like. Not loud, not dramatic, but quiet, steady, sacred. And now, the final thread. That ache you carried, it was never weakness. It was the soul trying to detox from everything that wasn't truth. That breakdown you feared, it was the ego's last desperate scream before finally releasing control. That silence that terrified you, it was the sound of your real self returning home. You are not the story they wrote about you. You are not the fear that kept you obedient. You are not the trauma you survived. You are the one who lived through all of it and still chose love. You are the flame beneath the ashes, the ocean beneath the noise, the breath that remains when everything else is gone. So take it all in, not as a wound, but as a rebirth. This isn't the end of your journey. It's the beginning of the version of you that was buried beneath survival. And now, it's time for the world to meet them.